Hey, Ernie, it is so nice to see you. How do you like the setup in our studio? We're
Um,
starting 2023 off in a right way.
it looks great, Joyce. I mean, I love the angle. It really feels very professional. It looks like a radio station. And, I mean, I think it really gives your image and what you're doing a little more validity to it. I mean, it feels more real,
Thank you.
than just, well, I mean, today with everybody having, the ability to record stuff and with Zoom and things, I mean, a lot of it looks pretty shaky and hacky, but this looks really good. It's very professional. I even like the couch in the background where your guests can sit and wait to be interviewed.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, because as I told you, I am challenged by height and it works really
It
well.
works
So
great. It works great. It keeps it, and like I said before, as the shows went on from when we started, you got higher up and it looked better than when you're down the microphones, right there. You're looking up to the microphone. Now you don't mind it. The angle is perfect. It's a very it's a dynamic angle. That's pretty much it. I mean, it looks very professional. So
thank you. I didn't even have to
congratulations.
levitate. I didn't even
Yeah.
have to go higher and
Yeah.
higher. Ernie, I'm looking
Yeah.
at Jo Jo Gunne. I remember in the early days of FM, Run, 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 when that song came out,
Yeah.
and just a great band because they evolved. Mark Andes and Jay Ferguson,
And
they
Jay
wrote
Ferguson.
Spirit.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because Spirit, later on, I think it was like Randy California was still part of the group, but Larry Weisberg was the bass player. And Larry Weisberg was also a client of Pacific Pioneers. He had a company called Silver Eagle, and they sold guitar straps. And he and Carmen Appice and a few other musicians did videos, instructional videos. This is probably well, it was in the late 70s, early 80s, because we had that account for quite a while. And he was one of the first guys to do these instructional videos. And he would have, famous musicians that were friends of his come in and they would video them and go through the stuff. It was called Backstage Pass, and it was cassettes, and we did all the packaging. We did the we did his logo and all the packaging for his guitar straps and picks and strings. I mean, he was kind of like an accessories guy for musicians, mainly guitar players. He was a bass player, and I was always a big fan of Spirit. They were, I guess, a West Coast kind of band, who had a couple of hits. But yeah, Jay Ferguson went on to do that. Jo Jo Gunne, I loved Run, 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 like you. And I had never really heard of them. And all of a sudden, in 1973, and Pacific Pioneer had already been in business for about a year, and we were doing some pretty cool things. We had a lot of really big acts that we were lucky enough to just fall into the right place, with, people like the Rolling Stones and Jesus Christ Superstar, those kind of things. But then coming out to California with Captain Beyond and Alice Cooper. I mean, Alice was like really at the top, really rising fast. And we were all part of all that. And the Doors with Ray Manzarek had reached out to us, and we did that Doors Full Circle album. Unfortunately, it was after Jim Morrison had passed, but I always felt that Full Circle album was probably the most incredible album I ever did, with the packaging and the zoetrope and all that. So we talked about it. So, when Jo Jo Gunne came along, it was through Art Linson. And I don't know whether you know much about Art. He was managing them. He also started Spin Dizzy Records, and he was managing, quite a few acts. He was managing, oh yeah, duh. Now I have let's see. God, who was he? He was managing Spirit. He was also managing Jo Jo Gunne. And there were a couple other acts that he was managing. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but he went on to become more of a film guy. And he produced a lot of films. I mean, and directed too. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, all these different major films and discovering acts like Nicolas Cage and some of these early actors that were in his movies, you know. And it's funny because when they came to us in 1973, they had this photograph of the album cover, and it was a black and white shot, and they wanted it to have more impact because it was pretty bland. And so what we did was we kind of went in and airbrushed on top of the photograph to make it look like they were made out of metal. You know, they had like all these metal highlights and stuff on their skin and things. And so we did that. I designed the Jo Jo Gunne lettering that you see above me here. And they actually used that lettering on quite a few albums. It's really funny. The same thing happened with Foghat. You know, when I did Foghat's logo, they used it on other albums, but they really only came to us for one album. Jo Jo Gunne was the same way. Like I said, there were acts that kept coming back. You know, Alice Cooper, Black Oak, Arkansas, you know, Grand Funk Railroad. They were acts that kept coming back. And then there were these acts that we did one thing for, you know. And I think out of all the stuff that we did for this particular album, then on the back cover that you see below here, they really look like they're melting and, you know, but again, we only had a photograph to work with. And Art Linson came to the studio a few times, and he was one of these guys that would stand on your shoulder, and every little thing you did, he would have a comment about. And I guess he rubbed me the wrong way one day, and I threw him out of the studio. You know, I threw at Pacific Pioneer. He just, you know, it was that kind of place. I mean, he was causing issues, and, you know, it was just, it was at the wrong time, the wrong thing he said, you know, and so I actually physically pushed him out of the studio. Probably one of the big mistakes that I made, because he went on to do, you know, The Wildlife, Car Wash, and I remember The Untouchables. You know, he kind of really broke ground. I mean, what's his name from? I'm having some real brain problems this morning. Sean Connery got an Academy Award for that movie. Kevin Costner was in that movie. So he kind of discovered a lot of talent, and he sort of did the same thing in the music business. But, you know, again, he just rubbed me the wrong way, and I actually escorted him out of the office. And that's the last time we did anything for Jo Jo Gunne, unfortunately. But, you know, I think one of the best things we did beside the logo is that Bite Down Hard graphic that you sort of see behind me there.
I like that. That really translates as to what the album is about. That is fabulous, Ernie.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And we had a staff. One of the guys that was a staff, I think I had mentioned, I had 6 illustrators that were on staff at Pacific Pioneer. Joe Patagno, that went on to do all the Motorhead covers, and he became like the Drew Struzan of heavy metal. And, you know, then there was Drew and Bill Garland. Carl Ramsey was an airbrush artist, and he did that airbrush illustration of the teeth biting down hard. And I sort of put the lips in there because I had, you know, the experience with the Rolling Stones.
No, we didn't. Lips.
Yeah, lips. You wake up and dream of lips. But, you know, with Bite Down Hard, it was a perfect graphic. And Carl actually taught Drew Struzan how to use an airbrush. Drew had never used an airbrush. He was always doing colored pencil and watercolor and oil paint, but he had never used a airbrush. And Carl taught him how to use an airbrush. And the first time he used an airbrush was on Scorching Beauty, the Iron Butterfly album that we did with the woman. It was kind of like
that was nice.
You know, yeah, just an amazing cover. And, you know, all these original pieces, I apologize for the quality of some of the stuff that, you know, I put up back there. It's kind of out of focus or low res. And it's because I have so many pieces. I have like just artwork, 350 pieces. It's almost impossible to take great pictures of everything, especially if it's, you know, something that's not, you know, a big thing, you know. All the big images I have, and I have images of. And eventually, as we do the book, and Jo Jo Gunne will be part of that book in these pieces, I will have those pieces scanned. I have that particular piece of artwork is scanned, and it's really beautiful. The logo I have, but I haven't had it shot, and there's other logos that I really need to have done, like Sarah, like we talked about last time. I mean, that's probably one of the most beautiful pieces of lettering I ever did.
Sure
and
was.
along with the Bee Gees. And I have the Bee Gees, but I don't have the Sarah. I have the artwork, but I need to, to have it all done. And as we move forward with the book's going to probably be 300 or 400 pages, and it's not just, and I've had people say, well, you're going to do another album cover book. No, Pacific Eye and Ear was much more than an album cover design firm. It was an album cover design firm that we became well known for, but our corporate work was probably 3 to 5 times more than the music stuff. The music was kind of actually, in some cases it was a plus. In some cases it was a negative. I mean, when you're dealing with companies like Nestle and Kraft, the music business, our music of that time wasn't selling products. Okay. It's not like today, and the modern music today doesn't really sell products. It won't for another 10 years. It's just how corporate America works. It's always a little bit behind because they're a little more to lose, I guess. And so, having foot firmly planted in both and leveraging, both at the same time, it did open doors for clients like Alltech Lansing, which will be one that we talked about when James B. Lansing was an engineer at Alltech. Alltech was the first voice of the theater speaker. When you heard Al Jolson sing, the jazz singer, for the first time ever in film, that was an Alltech speaker that you heard it through. We got the Alltech account in the 70s, and we just really, I mean, it was an amazing ride, and we'll talk about it. But again, those pieces, like Panavision, had Panavision for 9 years. We did some incredible stuff, but it all needs to be photographed. It all needs to be scanned. And, and as we move forward with the book, we'll be adding that along with Jo Jo Gunne. I had met Jay, and I had met, Art brought him over to the office a couple times while we were working on that particular photograph. Because like I said, they gave us that photograph. It was a black and white photograph, and it wasn't really, it was just them, It wasn't
I'm amazed at what you do with just one photograph. You've had that so many times and all, it's different than with Alice Cooper, where you had so much to choose from, and it really just shows your talent and the talent of the people at Pacific Eye and Ear. Just take one photograph and just make an amazing cover, just to expand it, and enhance it the way you do. Yeah, well,
Quincy Jones was another one. We talked about him a couple shows ago, and that was just that photograph of him, and it really didn't have any interest. And the Jo Jo Gunne shot was kind of the same thing. And they didn't really have a logo, and their music was great. I wish I had kept all these cassettes, because pretty much every time we work with a band, we would either be in the studio listening, or they would give us tapes of working tracks. And I had Sticky Finger. I had a cassette of the working tracks from Sticky Finger. I had the working tracks from pretty much a lot of the albums, especially Alice's stuff. And we would go into the studios as well with Lou Reed and Alice and the Bee Gees. But, having those cassettes would have really been something to this day. And somewhere they're there. I just don't know where. And there's thousands of pieces. Pacific Eye and Ear was 14 and a half years. I have the job book of every job that we did in that 14 and a half years. And there's few thousand, and then I kept on going, so there's thousands more, because Pacific Eye and Ear ended in 1984. And from then till now, I've continued working and mainly in corporate America. Music has kind of changed. Album covers really don't, I mean, maybe in a box set. When we did the old school for Alice, that box set had some vinyl in it, had some single 45s. I mean, and there is a resurgence, I guess, for, people who really love music will go out and buy a turntable and buy vinyl, and groups release still vinyl. But most people don't even have a record player anymore. I noticed a few years back, it was for Christmas one year, I got Burton Cummings a record player, because he didn't have a record player. He had all these cassettes and cartridges and stuff, but he didn't have a record player. And so I gave him a record player for Christmas. He was like, "Oh, this is really great." I remember these. Yeah. So, it's kind of interesting. And again, yeah, Jo Jo Gunne, great guys. Like I said, I only met Jay and Art. One of my big mistakes that I regret was, I should have had a little more patience. But in 1973, I was 27. And when you're that age and you've done some things like I had done, you kind of, I don't know, you're kind of young and stupid, and you do things like that. You react from an emotional standpoint when I should have had more patience. My partner, Tony Graboy at the time, was such an understanding guy. I mean, he kind of was crazy that I went and did that, but he understood. I think that's why we hit it off so well. And Pacific Pioneer was so successful for all those years, because he really, he was a business guy and he was a sales guy, and he was probably the best I've ever worked with. But, he also had a piece of him that I never saw until we came out to California together to open up, the office for the guy that we were working for as the music industry was, evolving out here. And so as we were kind of put together and had to swim in the same fishbowl, we became really good friends and really, and like I had said before, I would have never, without him, we would have never started Pacific Pioneer. Without Bonnie, I would have never come back. I would have never stayed in New York. There's been those kinds of people in my life that have influenced my career, and I've never done it. I tell people all the time, there isn't any piece that I've ever done that I did by myself. I was always influenced by somebody around me, the environment, whatever. I think creative people need to be like that.
Yes.
And sometimes they go through like this with blinders, and whatever this is out here that's keeping them to just stay focused on what's in front of them and not what's going on in the world. That's still pretty relevant, but artists need to be wide open and be open to everything. And one of the great things that I've had is people like Tony in my life and Bonnie, and there's been a few. And then I've made some mistakes. I made some,
Oh, we all do. We all do. Ernie.
Yeah, of course. Well, and especially after, Pacific Pioneer ended, I was kind of like, I was like an abused person that got all cleaned up and dressed up and looking all pretty good and went out and find another abuser. And I did that 3 more times. And not that it was physical, but just someone that was portrayed themselves as one thing, but was actually another. And I just kept falling into that. I fell into it 3 more times after Tony and I had split up in 1984. And about 11 years ago, I just said no more. It wasn't their fault. I went through a lot of time blaming them. It was Tony's fault. It was Saul's fault. It was Craig's fault. It was all these people, but it was really my fault. It was really me looking for that same person because there was no surprises. I knew how it would end. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to face it, but I knew there was no surprises with the other partners. Tony was the best partner. Pacific Pioneer was the most amazing time. And I've just been lucky enough to not get stuck in time. It's really easy. We talked about that. It's very easy to become history.
Yeah.
And I could very easily just kick back and never do another thing and just live on what I've done up to now.
That's not you. That's not
no,
you.
It's not me. No.
I know you. Just for the time that I've known you, oh my heavens, you've done just amazing things, and we all go through that. It's a journey.
Yeah.
I think if you don't have the journey, and you don't learn from it, it's part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Failure, I used to, and we are conditioned to forget about failures, oh, it's too bad, move on. So this is a bad thing, forget about it. No. And I did that. But then I realized that you got to understand why you failed. And if you keep forgetting about it and moving on, you keep making the same mistake. And I kept doing that until finally I said, wait a minute, it's not them, it's me. And I need to understand why I failed. What did I do wrong so that I don't do it again? And that happened 11 years ago, and it's been great ever since. I mean, it it's just like you said, it's an amazing journey. You have to go through those things to learn. I think if you talk to anybody that's been successful at anything, they'll tell you that they've got a string of failures that go right along with that success. And, I'm certainly no exception. I've got my share of failures, but I've also, I'm still here, like Elton John said, I'm still standing.
That's a good one. That is a good one.
That's one we should play along with the Jo Jo Gunne song.
I think I may just do that.
Yeah.
Do you have any Jo Jo Gunne songs you like to hear? And I'm
Run,
going to put Run, Run. Yes.
It's, that, and, I mean, I'm still standing. It's really that. I think I really liked Elton John. And I can remember when I was working at Decca Records, I was at Norman Levit, and I had done Jesus Christ Superstar, and I was working with Bill Levy, the creative director, and I was doing other albums there. I did an Aida opera. I did a few other albums with Bill, and I remember him calling me into his office one day at Decca and said, we just signed this new artist, man. You got to listen to this. It was Tumbleweed Connection.
Elton John. Heavens.
Yeah, I mean, it was brand, nobody ever heard of Elton John. And he said, we just signed this act. I want to see what you think. Listen to this. And it was just amazing. And, I've always loved his music. And I actually spent time with Bernie Taupin. I spent 3 days with Bernie when we were doing From the Inside for Alice Cooper. And that's an album that we should talk about.
Yes. We're all these great ideas.
Yeah, I know. I got to make a note. That is a great story because we shot that album at a convent in Boyle Heights. And I don't know whether you're familiar with Boyle Heights, but it's not a really good area of Los Angeles. But we needed something that looked like an asylum. And there were these nuns that ran this convent, and they had in Boyle Heights, and they had converted the convent over to taking care of older people that couldn't afford, it was like a I guess assisted living. Yeah. And this is back in the day for older people that really couldn't afford the kind of money that you had to pay. And I remember we spent 3 days there shooting that album, and the nuns were great. They were so fascinated with Alice. They just loved Alice. I mean, and so you're looking at this thing, and they're there, on the side behind the camera, and getting Alice's autograph and Bernie's autograph, and I was able to spend some really quality time with Bernie Taupin. What an incredible person, and Alice too. Alice is not anything that you would imagine. He's not like anything you would imagine. And God bless his mom. She just passed away last week. And, he was very close to his mom, and she was a wonderful person. I met her a couple of times at concerts, and, he and my mom were really good friends. And my mother used to tout it to all her older friends that she knew Alice Cooper, and they were just amazed because Alice, this is like the 70s, and Alice is on everybody's mind. And you didn't know whether it was a man or a woman, or if he was going to bite you or kiss you. You didn't know. And my mom touted the fact that her and Alice, and she's got pictures of the two of them together, and, and they were really good. He was such a nice person. And Bernie too. Bernie was a really incredible, and still is an incredible talent. And that team, Taupin, Elton John, I mean, wow, what a team.
Just a great
they're Lennon and McCartney, Cummings and Bachman. There's these, and there's a lot of them, throughout music and in all genres of music. But, that was, at some point we should talk about the, you've got a list. I'm going to make a complete list and send it to you. We've got tons of stuff to talk about in 2023. So, and it's a great neighborhood. And again, I love being here and love coming and spending time with you and our neighbors on Facebook.